Hi, I'm Dr. Kevin Milo, one of the co-hosts of the Physician Empowerment Podcast. At Physician Empowerment, we're dedicated to improving the lives of Canadian physicians, personally, professionally, and financially. If you're loving what you're listening to, let us know. We always want to hear your feedback. Connect with us. If you want to go further, we've got outstanding programming both in person and online. So look us up. But regardless, we hope you really enjoy this episode.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this very exciting episode of Physician Empowerment Podcast. And today we're going to talk about a little bit darker side of the world in the finance world. We're going to talk about Mythbuster, and we're really privileged and happy to have Nick Giovannetti. He did a very good topic on exactly this coverage on this topic during our Toronto conference, and we named it the Mythbusters in the Marketplace. So today we'll talk about what we need to watch out in the finance world. So years ago, I have one of my mentors. He's a very, very smart doctor because he mentored me. And Dr. George is his name. Our kids call him Grandpa George. And George says, hey, here's somebody with money and somebody with experience. Actually, he said, here's a doctor with money and somebody with experience. They met each other, shook hands, and had a fair transaction. And the doctor with the money got the experience, and the guy with experience got the doctor's money. All right, so it's a fair transaction. And of course, we talk about not so honorable transaction, right? So on our quest to financial freedom, that's what we're going to talk about this whole year is our quest to financial freedom. We have to go through a few jungles. We talk about the few jungles, we call it the dread jungle, like debt, risk, asset, and tax, right? These are jungles. And at the risk jungle, in every jungle, there are booby traps, right? There are tricks, traps, perils. There's always some hidden dragons and whatever, snakes, right? That want to bite you. So when we go through our journey and when we mature in age in our practice, we start to accumulate some asset we want to invest, or we need to do some tax strategy. So we meet people, right? And they always want to tell you something, or this is even better in quotation mark, that we go to our locker room, not locker room, not when at high school anymore, in the OR room, in the change room, or at your cooler at your office, right? There's always tips, right? And it's historically well known that physicians would love to take hot tips from their colleagues, be it stock market hot tips and get slaughtered later, or hot tips on, this tax strategy or that something. So today we want to unpack this space with Nick, and because there's so many stories, I've got stories, he's got stories, and I would categorize them a little bit. I think there's some that are just omission, that they forgot to tell you something, omission. There's some that are neglect, right? It's negligence, right? This, we could parallel it into medicine or dentistry, right? And the next level is misrepresentation. They didn't quite represent something well. And then next is they're really bending the truth and telling a lie. And lastly, the whole thing is a scam, right? So from something shady, something pushy, and something frank, outright scam. So there's the whole scape. So Nick, tell me about this jungle. You're very seasoned and you see all kinds. What's your experience?
Yeah, thanks for having me here, Wing. I think that generally speaking, when people get into this business, they're trying to do the right thing for people. They get into it because they want to help the general public, or they want to help a profession, and sometimes that can be clouded with trying to portray that you're credible and portray that you have more knowledge than you do, and that humbleness is left out. Well, the thing I've always suggested in this industry is that, investment and financial professionals should really have residency period, much like physicians. We should have that couple years where you're under the extreme supervision of a respected colleague in your field who oversees everything you do. You get to learn by boots on the ground. But unfortunately, that just doesn't happen. And it actually is generally quite easy to become licensed. The provincial regulations for being licensed are not that difficult. And to give people, a high level of that, an insurance license is particularly easy to get. And you only need a 60% pass on a 100-question multiple choice exam. So that means 40% of the material you could get wrong, and some of the other stuff you might have guessed on to pass. So there has been some concern around, title protection, people being able to call themselves planners when they're not planners. You have to be aware and be able to do that background check on who's giving you the advice, because it's really not that difficult to get licensed. Really, you just can't be a criminal and you can't be bankrupt.
Well, but there's always people who didn't have a lot of schooling, but they're intrinsically really smart, right? But then the difference is how do you know, right? It's like these people. We always have patients come in and say, I'm tired of the Western way of medicine. I'm talking to this master herbalist, or whatever title. I'm not trying to single out, but I've heard all sorts of various titles. And at the end of the day, you're going to ask, what kind of schooling did they do, right? And what kind of knowledge they really possess, and how do you know, right, as the outsider?
And I think that it's good to ask questions. I mean, what's really interesting is that a lot of knowledge of someone's background is available if you want it. You can look up on national registration databases and see if people are licensed. You can see who they're licensed with. You can see how long they've been licensed. You can see if they've ever been licensed in the past. You can see if they've ever been disciplined. Same with insurance. It's very easy to go online. You can search to see how long has somebody been insurance licensed? What provinces are they licensed in? If you know where to look, then you can do some of that due diligence on your own. And it's not to say, like you said, Wing, it's not to say it's a problem if someone doesn't have a lot of experience, but they should have a good team around them. And you should see those humble comments that they might make with, you know what, I'm going to double check that, or I'm going to fact check that, or let me bring in my, seasoned superior that I work with to the next call. So you can ask some of these more detailed, deep questions. I think that there's too many people out there that are trying to save face by giving answers to questions that they're really not able to answer proficiently.
Right. So I think layer one is somebody who claimed to be somebody important or somebody smart. So if they have some titles behind their name, then what you're saying is, despite what they print on their glossy business card, they may not be.
Well, and that's the other thing is you can fact check even those designations that people put behind their name. You can see if they're real. You could see if those letters have been earned. You can see if they're in good standing. So I just really don't see a harm in double checking. Same way that I can look up online a physician. I can see, what are people saying about this physician? How long have they been around? What's their rating? Is there complaints? You can do that on financial professionals as well.
Now, we're in this space, right? And there's this whatever website, I don't even want to mention them, right? But they're usually skewed, right? People who are happy, they don't put their beef on it, right? People who had a beef said something that may not be true, right? Just because they want you to authorize some narcotics you didn't, so they blaspheme your name, right? So there's always this. Now, of course, that applies to every single industry, right? So granted, right? Yeah. So there are ways, especially in information age, you can check people out, right? You can Google people or into the professional space, go into more maybe LinkedIn, maybe a slightly better space. Of course, this space is heavily advertised and take advantage of as well. But at least you can fact check some of those, right? So you encouraging us that we should do this kind of exercise.
I really do believe that people should background check who they're getting information from, and make sure that they have a team around them, and do they peer review their recommendations. I know a not so recognized practice that me and some of the other faculty at Physician Empowerment do is, we fact check things with each other. We tell our ideas to each other. We look for peer review. I think that in the financial world, it's not as cookie cutter as just buying products.
Now, this is really, really interesting. Peer review is actually something that is very familiar in our space, Nick, right? So we always have peer review journal, right? And even the articles that people can publish, right? We talk about this grade A evidence that is randomized, double blind, right? Even the journals themselves have different gradation, right? They want the top peer reviewed article, right? And of course, our patient said, look, I just read this book or listened to this YouTube, watch this YouTube, this doctor so promote you can do something crazy, right? And they said, but they're a doctor. And I said, well, it's easy for a doctor to impress a layman, but for a doctor to impress other doctors, their peers, is a different level, right? So I understand that, right? I get it, right? So when they flash some ideas at us that is really sparkly, right? And if they're really different than what everybody else in their field is talking, either this guy is super smart, everybody's dumb, or red flag should be up. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly right. I think that people that you're working with should be discussing with you, who they've peer reviewed with or why they believe a certain idea is right, and don't be afraid to have that individual get involved with the rest of your team. So, for me to have a meeting with an accountant should be a good sign to somebody who's working with me as a financial planner. Why would you not want your financial planner and your accountant working hand in glove? So I think that if you're working with professionals that are open to that open dialogue and they're open to the peer review, I think that is a very good sign that you're working with not only a professional, but someone that's going to have your best interest in mind.
That is really interesting as well, because in my experience before, actually, we did physician empowerment and then move into the more wealth management team. Every professional in that space, or some are not even called professionals, right? Every single advisor, I've always seen them in solo, right? They never work in team. There's no peer reviews per se, and they just say whatever they say is right? And you just listen, right? So that is truly a different level, right? And it's different level of due diligence on our part. And after all, it's our hard-earned money. And so we talk about ID check, right? Is there a team? Is there a peer review? Next is motivation, right? So maybe I should just disclose one good story, a personal battle scar, right? So this is early in my days. This is probably the first financial planner that we had. And way back 30 years ago, it's even easier to become a CFP or insurance person, even easier, right? Even realtor way back is easier than now, right? Because qualifications kept climbing up. Anyways, so this lady got me into some sort of investment I forgot, in life insurance plan, and okay, whatever. I was so ignorant, just working 100 hours a week. And then she said, okay, fine. So then she called me a year later, a year and a half, and say, hey, doctor, midst of the day, I'm so excited. I'm at a seminar. And you need to diversify. I said, oh, okay. I thought we diversified already. No, you need to diversify some more. This thing costs segregated funds, seg funds, right? And 30 years ago, that was kind of the beginning of the in thing, right? And she says, you got to do everything again. And I said, okay, what do? I don't have that much money. I got debts, right? Like a lot of people we talk to. And she says, no. We got to pull whatever you out and go into this life insurance plan and get into a seg fund. Okay, whatever you say, right? And then so I said, so I thought there's penalty. Yep, you should suffer the penalty because you should get it out. This is the hardest thing, right? So we got into this, whatever it was, beyond my understanding. And then we went on and sang a lot of money every month. And then maybe a decade, no, not quite, maybe a few years later, I met a different financial planner. And this guy really, like you say, there's a group in his office, high integrity, it's just different persona, different level. And he looked at the plan and said, look, Wayne, you would never be able to pay this off. and whatever they promised you, you would never be able to benefit from it. And then, what about those seg funds? And the performance was not that great. But that's besides the point. It's just this plan doesn't work. And I said, what do we do? And you still need protection. Yep. So I'll get you another plan from a different insurance company. And then this would make sense. And to this day, 17 years later, I still have that plan. That's still valid. But the previous plan, we have to watch it die, like slowly die every month. every month you see this, you owe some money, pay up, and it's, no, don't pay, right? And years later, we forgot we want to pay. No, don't pay. And to watch that die is like seeing a pet die. It takes a toll on you, right? But so, and looking back, every time she diversified or I diversified, she got a new kitchen, she got a new trip to BC. So you got to know about motivation behind it, right?
Absolutely. And really understand how the individual gets paid and how they earn a living. Because you really should be able to pick up on, are they acting in my best interest, or is there some conflict of interest somewhere? And like you said, Wing, it's a terrible feeling when you're feeling like, I've purchased this product, it wasn't right for me, I'm watching it die, and every time one of these transactions occurred, this person was able to remodel their kitchen. That's not probably a good fit. And maybe if it was in a different situation and the product was right for you, you wouldn't care that they're remodeling their kitchen because they were paid for good work. So I think that's another identifier when you start to work with someone is looking under the hood with proper disclosure upfront. How do you earn a living? How do you get paid? Do you get paid when I do well, or do you get paid regardless of whether I do well or not? Right? Do you get paid for advice? Do you get paid based on product sales? When you manage my money, do you just set an advisory fee and you're compensated better if I do better and worse if I do worse? Right? Like, what is the motivation there? If you punt me over to that mortgage guy, do you get a kickback? Like, people really should understand the flow of the money. And then sometimes you can pick up subtleties as to, is this the right person for me? And are they choosing the right products and solutions based on whatever it is I need? And I think that if people are focusing purely on whatever it is you're saying that you're trying to accomplish, and the products are coming in secondary, that's a good sign. If somebody is leading with a product and they're feature dumping, that probably means you're being sold something. So there's a difference between solution solving and product purchasing, right?
That's a huge point. Yes, and there's so much of that now. This asking, just backtrack half a step, right? Nick, you just talk about asking for motivation, how you get paid. Now, I'm gonna say that we're very, very uncomfortable about that because we get into medicine to be altruistic, and most of us got publicly funded positions. And the most uncomfortable thing we do is to ask patients for money. In fact, patients get really uncomfortable when we ask them for money. So we are even more uncomfortable when patients ask us, how much do you make? Right? So we are so adverse in that. So we thought everybody just practices whatever they do in this altruism. Well, sorry, no, right? So what you're saying is it's okay. It's okay to ask how do you make money, right? And all those pointy questions that in medicine we just tend to just say it's a no-go zone, right? Here, it is not a taboo. It is important to know.
It is not taboo, and they should willingly give you that information. It's a good idea to ask if you've met with them once and you're now on a second meeting and they haven't talked about it yet. It's a good idea to ask, but I would say it is the opposite of taboo.
So disclosure becomes a really important thing. And if they don't voluntarily disclose, that's a little bit of a yellow alert, right?
Absolutely. It should be disclosed very early on into the engagement. If you're just having coffee and hanging out and socializing, and there's never really been that step towards engaging in working together, then that's not taboo that they haven't just told you everything about how they earn a living. Right. But if you are beginning the engagement is now going from, I'd like to learn more about what you do and I'd like to work together, the disclosure should right away be happening. And a lot of times you should be signing a letter of engagement, which will have proper disclosure in the letter of engagement as to what that individual is qualified and capable of doing, and what they're not qualified and not capable of doing.
Right. So engagement, right? So just because somebody have been talking to you, bringing you for lunch, dinner, whatever, coffee, a few times, they're not necessarily your designated advisor, right? And I'm in real estate, it's the same thing. I remember there's some wars between realtors, because Realtor A came to talk to this guy, Realtor B came to talk to the same guy, and then they had a fight. This is my client. That's my client. Well, have you engaged? Right. So what you're saying is it's really important to have a written letter of engagement with all of this disclosures. Then you have a client professional relationship.
Exactly. You have then read through what they're qualified and not qualified to do. You've read through what they're capable of helping you with, and you've signed off on it.
Right.
And I know even what we do is we have areas where your accountant, your tax lawyer, any other advisory person, your spouse, they can sign off too if you'd like that engagement to grow and that person to really become a project manager for your entire financial life. Now, you won't see that as often play out if you're dealing with retail financial institutions, like walking into your brick and mortar TD Bank or RBC Bank or whoever it is. Right. They may not have that engagement letter stuff there. They're more of an employee style type arrangement. So there may be a different way that they're onboarding. I guess I'm more so speaking to an independent financial planner or independent financial professional that has their own firm, their own company, and they select their clientele.
Right. So now let's pivot over this really interesting and important point. I'm not picking any bank, but a bank, right? A bank, they know that you're a doctor. They want to, it's like Spider-Man. They got these spider webs to grab you in, right? Even my kids trying to move their account away from my master account, they say, no, your kids need to come in. We just want a simple gesture. No, they got to come in and sit in with our advisors, right? So, and a lot of us are so trusting in our bank advisors, right? And they all, it's a big five, right? They're huge because you trust them with all your money. Right? They loaned you a lot of money, so you trust their professionals, and you just keep going. And at the end of the day, so you went to the wealth division and all that. So them versus outside independent advisors, what's the pros and cons? Maybe give us that background landscape.
Well, I mean, again, this is opinion piece, so I'm a little bit biased because I'm on the independent side. I believe that, again, when you follow the motivation of how someone's compensated, if they're paid a very handsome salary, they have benefits, pension plan, they're trying to ladder climb their way through a corporate institution, their motivations may be slightly different than someone who is incorporating their own business, and their business is working with select clientele that they want to have a lifelong relationship with, not so much a transactional in that moment relationship with. It's very difficult, I find, for larger corporate financial institutions like the big banks to have people stay in a role long enough to get really great at that role, because they're generally off to the next thing. And they don't necessarily have a book of clients that they particularly handhold or look after that are theirs to watch and be there for. I think of it as potentially a good analogy would be like going to a walk-in clinic versus having a family physician. One that is with you for your entire life. You don't have to repeat who you are, what you've been through, what they've done treatment-wise for you, changes in your life. They just know who you are. My family physician knew me from a baby. They then retired. Their child took over. I don't have to explain who I am. And they're going to also pick up on things that might be weird. If I come in and my face looks totally different, they're going to ask me what's going on. When I walk into a walk-in clinic, I might be meeting somebody that I'm only ever going to meet once in my life. And I might see them for 5 minutes. How are they going to properly assess and diagnose me and be able to pick up on things that maybe I need?
And we got terms for that. It's called episodic care versus longitudinal care. That's right. As a family physician, that's what we believe in. Totally, right? So we that's why we need somebody that is with us for a long time. Let's go over to loyalty, right? I'm dancing all over, but I'm seeing relevant points. And I find that physicians have this switch in our brain, right? We either hate you, don't like you, you're a scammer, right? We have these deflectors, right? When a suited salesperson show up at our office or corridor or hospital corridor, it's a pharmaceutical rep, right? You instantly don't want to talk to them, right? And we have this deflector thing. But very soon, if they win your trust, it's all in, all out. It's all or nothing. Then people trusted the advisors. I'm not going to name different kinds of advisors, but they became loyal to them to the point that they blindly trusted them, and sometimes for decades. And so one of my colleagues was reassured by this big bank wealth division guy, stocks picking guy, and say, "Doctor, for the last 20 years, you made 20% per year." And my colleagues believed them. Well, I didn't know you hired Warren Buffett, to have 20% a year. Wow, that's amazing, right? And it's like a joke, but my colleague absolutely believed it. And that is not possible, right? But that blind loyalty, and some they're loyal to their tax advisor and just kept leading down the wrong path. I walked with this at our enterprises, and I meticulously tried to structure the company so that they can benefit from these things like lifetime capital gains exemption. But their tax advisors kept missing the point. At the end, they missed it, right? And so this loyalty, blind loyalty, how do you stomach that when one day you need to challenge the person that you trusted with blind loyalty? How do you do that?
Yeah, that's a really tricky one. And in even some cities, it's very, very tight. I grew up with this person. I've known them my whole life. I blindly trust them. I would say that one of the hardest things to realize is that you've outgrown your team. Your care required has outgrown that profession or that professional. And it's like breaking up with a significant other. It can be very, very emotional. Mm-hmm. I think that everybody's going to have their own way of doing it. Maybe you write down pros, cons, what have you. But at the end of the day, you have to sit back and think, have I outgrown this person, yes or no? Meaning, my business has gotten to a level of complexity that I believe is over their head. It's not personal. It's just that I have outgrown that person and I need additional expertise. And if they don't have somebody on the team with that expertise, don't be afraid to explore and don't be afraid to interview, right? There's a lot of financial professionals out there, just like there's a lot of medical professionals. Don't be afraid to interview. And if you're working with someone who you feel that you trust on a go forward, again, look for referrals, look for some way to fact check that person. But it's really difficult, Wing. I think that you have to remember what matters is you. There's a book out there that I've advised a few people to read. It's called Profit First. Go to work and pay yourself before you pay anybody else. Mm-hmm. All your bills, everything else, right? If I earn $1, what is your profit first? If it's 10%, you better take 10, you earn $10, you put $1 to the side. Mm-hmm. Anybody else who talks to me, they only get to talk about $9. Mm-hmm. Profit first, I've just made that decision. I think when you're talking about your own financial well-being, you have to think about what matters is you.
Yeah.
It's okay to want to upgrade your team when you're ready. And sometimes you work with a great person, but they may not necessarily have the support that you need. Some people really like to be able to reach their people whenever they call and they get a call back in 24 hours. Other people don't care if they wait a week. But there's so many different styles of advisor out there. You got to find the right one for you, and don't be ashamed to chase that.
Right. So I can say again the parallels that we draw, right, as healthcare providers and service providers in our field. Right, I'm a family physician, right, and always have to know when to refer, right, when to keep the care under my wheelhouse, when to refer, and when we do not refer properly, when things go bad, there's a complaint, we'll be at fault, right, and so. Yeah. So I would say the same applies to any other profession, right? In the financial wealth industry, right? If they get really offended by working with somebody or have contravening opinion, that tells you something about that practitioner.
It does. I mean, I can give you an example. I just had a physician ask me about an Indian bank account. They wanted to open an Indian bank account. first thing out of my mouth was, I have no idea if you should do this or not. I think that, whoever is talking to you about it, have more conversations, but maybe run it by your accountant, maybe run it by a cross-border accountant. I can maybe help introduce you to somebody who has a background in that, but I can't give you an answer. And I think that when you work or pick financial professionals to be a part of your team, nobody knows everything, and nobody should have an answer to everything. If they do,
watch out.
If they do, then there's probably an issue.
Right.
It's too big. The world is too big. There's too much to know for one person to know everything. So if you are dealing with someone who knows everything,
right,
they probably know the least.
Right. Now, so we've been talking about, this is really good stuff, Nick, right? About the team, the people you trust, these are the people you vetted. Let's move into the shadier out and about world, right? I think you talk about a term called clickbait. That's an interesting term. Can you explain that?
Well, we're in the world of the mass information, the internet, algorithms, YouTube, TikTok. A lot of times titles and the psychology of selling is really evident in all of that enormous online world. And a lot of videos out there, short snippets, a lot of handles are just clickbait. They're to get you to click. It's like you're the fish in the ocean, and this is the bait that they've put on the end of their line. A lot of that stuff needs to be verified and fact checked, because the internet is the big blue ocean. If you've never eaten that type of fish before, or that type of living creature that came out of it, you better double check what it is. Same if you're in the forest and you just pull a plant out of the ground and start chewing on it. You don't know what it is. You got to make sure that you don't become victim to the clickbait where you just got hooked as a fish out in the big blue ocean.
So, and the fact is we're busy, right? And yes, we're curious, right? Maybe we're too busy with just flashing things. They're like videos and all that my family share with me. Suddenly they got a whole category of new things like cats that they weren't even interested in. Suddenly you got all the cats. Well, you have a financial product. Maybe they found that you look at some financial products, then all these things come, all these people come, right? I find that even on my text, these are scam texts, right? They're getting more and more sophisticated and, more business-like, right? And so, so if we inadvertently got into these bait thing, what's your advice?
I think that awareness is key. Be aware that when you're Googling things, looking things up on social medias, if you start following a trend of YouTube videos, those things are going to start to be more and more targeted to you and could give you a biased view of whatever you're researching is real. If you're aware of it, like for example, as we just mature as people, when we look back to things we did when we were 20, we might say, why did I do that? Well, because you probably just weren't socially aware yet, or you weren't mature enough yet to make those decisions or to see those blurred lines. You spend a little bit too much fluid consumption at the bar one night before you have an early practice in the morning. I think that a lot of it is the maturity and awareness. So when you're on social media, have the maturity to know there's a lot of fluff out there, and there's a lot of just bait floating around. The psychology of those algorithms are incredibly smart. They're going to hook you in. They're going to convince you that this is real, that this is right, that this is factual. A lot of that stuff is not background checked. A lot of that stuff is not tested, and some of it might even be just pure completely wrong. So if you're aware of it, it's okay to consume information. Just be aware of how much of the unsure information you want to consume before you start to look for credible sources.
Right. Well, now they can have AI generated stuff. Recently, we just watched a video feed that not just I got it, my wife got it, right? Kids got it. And it talks about, CRA, the government wants you to take care of yourself. So you get this residual income, right? It's like, Really? Wow. I haven't heard that. I heard about upping the inclusion rate. I heard that there's a new thing you should click, right? But
Yeah.
it's AI generated, right? So, and then let's dive into psychology because I've been around long enough, you've been around long enough, but we have colleagues that step into these traps. And you know what? They are the last one to admit it or last one to extricate themselves out of the poo-poo they're in. So why do people do that?
Well, sometimes I think that, well, there's so many different money mindsets out there. There's different psychological profiles of people, and people have lived different lives. So they've had different things happen to them that they react differently to. And I really don't want this call to be fear mongering because
Yes.
you have to trust at some point.
Yes.
What we're hoping to say is, how do you find the trustworthy? Well, sometimes you make a decision that just didn't make sense. Like Wing, you had your example of you're slowly watching this product sort of die.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, again, awareness, take a step back and be logical.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever you need to do to get your mind into the state of being logical, because when you sit back and you look at financial decisions logically with no emotion, the decisions are a lot easier. You probably sat back and thought logically about this product. Okay, it doesn't make sense to take a massive hit on it. I'm going to slowly drag it over time. I can stomach that. Logically, it makes sense, right? Or whatever your decision making was around that.
Mm-hmm.
There are products out there. There are things you could have purchased. There are things you could have done that logically don't make sense. Mm-hmm. If I earn 500 grand a year and a product is costing me 400 grand a year, and I only have 100 left over to pay taxes, to buy groceries, to put fuel in my car, to pay for my kids' haircuts, well, does that logically make sense? To take 80% of your before tax income and stuff it into a one product, one trick pony solution?
But they usually got branded as a very smart solution.
Yeah.
The secret, right?
Yeah, there's no magic pill. And I think that when you look back at history and you look back at many people who have built generational wealth over time, a lot of them have the same principles. And those principles are designed to create logic and to give you logical decision making, right? Mm-hmm. Here's a principle. Good debt is a debt that maybe pays you an income, right? If I purchased a piece of real estate that supplied me with rental income, that would be logically making sense. There's a principle there of don't just buy a house and leave it empty, right? If you're not going to live in it. That was maybe not the greatest example. I'm thinking on the fly. But you understand that in the wealth creation space, in the financial space, there's principles you can follow. Should 80% of your income go into a risk-based solution, which is, let's just say, life insurance, and you have nothing else, but 80% of your income is going to go into this risk-based solution? That probably doesn't make a lot of sense. Most risk-based solutions are 5 to 10% maximum of what we make. So why would 80% be a good solution? I don't know where that would fit, where that would ever logically make sense, right? Try living on less than you earn. Try living on 50% of what you earn. That would logically make sense because then I have 50% to save for my future self, to indulge myself today, to support my family. Some of those principles can be as basic as just creating ratios. I earn X and I divide it into 3 buckets, or I earn Y and I divide it into 5 buckets, whatever your situation is. Right? Take the emotion out and use logic, and your financial world can become simpler and easier.
Now, for those of us who are listening, who this sounded really far-fetched, there are names and strategies and we can use, right? But we don't want to do that at this space. Right, but there are lots of these. I remember this is in the 80s and 90s that I have patients and friends who worked in a school board, and there was this charity move coming in, and they come and either donate art or buy computer software or buy computers. Right, you donate $10,000 and you get a $50,000 tax write-off. these things just reincarnated so many times. And even school boards got suckered in. And guess what happened with CRA, right? Years later, they climb all of them back, and you cough up with money that you haven't got to pay back for the tax that you have written off, right? So these are not just one or two individuals, these are organizations falling for it.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, there's tons of those opportunities. Generally, when you're hearing about something, it's too late. So, for example, we talked about it at the physician conference, the GameStop, stock rise. If you're hearing about it after the fact, you probably missed the boat. Same with Bitcoin. I talked to somebody who told me they got into Bitcoin when it was 67 cents.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean that I should buy it at 50 grand? Probably not. I missed the boat on that, and that's okay. But I would say that now that we're talking about financial professionals, in my opinion, many financial professionals who have gone through the education of learning about money, we are very risk averse. Mm-hmm. We do not like gambling with people's money. Mm-hmm. We are all about safety and preserving that money and giving them good, long, sustainable, predictable outcomes, as predictable as we can educatedly advise.
Right.
That's really important, because the financial professional, if they think like that, that means that they are very aware that chasing grand slams is not going to win a ball game. You just want to get on base.
Mm-hmm. It's like us, we have sworn the oath, right? First, do no harm, right? So prima nocere, right? That's what we sworn. First, do no harm. We're not saying that go to this fancy surgery and you have a 1 in a million chance I'll lengthen your life by 100 years, right? Like, we don't fall for things like that. And I think true financial professionals have this fiduciary duty that they signed off to. Is like our Hippocratic oath, right? And so it is important, right, to differentiate that. So that's good. I don't want to make this just a fear-mongering thing, but we want to help everybody have this alert, this red alert. We're not going into X-Files. I'm so old. I used to be X-File fans. Trust no one. In medicine, we do that already, right? But we have to be able to trust something and someone, right? However, that trust comes with a dollar figure. Huge dollar figure. It could be your lifetime saving, could be your family clan wealth, right? So it is important to fact check and to check out the assumptions, the biases, and sometimes frauds, right, or scams, right? And I've a lot more scams than that guy sucker into that I lost money than I want to admit here. But so thank you, Nick, for this really good session for us to just sit around and just think about these things, and as we hear maybe our past experiences will perk up, and hopefully it sets up a few red flags in our brain and our synapses that we will watch out for future, right, mishaps that would come our way. Yeah.
And I would add, Wing, to that. It's okay to ask questions. Mm-hmm. If you don't understand something, ask a question. And if you're going to be purchasing solutions for your financial life, understand it. You really have to understand it. If you can't recite it back to the person who said it to you, at least at a general understanding, it's probably not the right time yet to jump into that. And it's okay. You might pick it up right away. Others might pick it up over 2 to 3 months. Sometimes people just are busier in their life. They have young kids. They're working long hours. They do an 80% workload at ER and 80% in their clinic. You're probably extremely tired. I don't think it would be advisable at that time to make a massive financial decision.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
And it's okay to take as much time as you need.
Right, exactly. Okay, good advice. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining, and thank you, Nick, again for your time and your wisdom, and really, really unbiased, totally product agnostic, unbiased opinion to dissect the whole thing. So we at Physician Empowerment, we're here to empower everybody, right, to ask smarter questions, right, so that they can move on in their journey, their quest for freedom without falling into traps. Okay, thank you, Nick, again.
Thank you so much for listening to the Physician Empowerment Podcast. If you're ready to take those next steps in transforming your practice, finances, or personal well-being, then come and join us at phys-empowerment.ca, physempowerment.ca to learn more about how we can help. If today's episode resonated with you, I'd really appreciate it if you would share our podcast with a colleague or friend, and head over to Apple Podcasts to give us a 5-star rating and review. If you've got feedback, questions, or suggestions for future episode topics, we'd love to hear from you. If you want to join us and be interviewed and share some of your story, we'd absolutely love that as well. Please send me an email at kmilo@physempowerment.ca. Thank you again for listening.